Trump versus Petro, a diplomatic firestorm and the specter of military intervention. The intensifying clash between U.S. President Donald J. Trump and Colombian President Gustavo Petro has plunged U.S.-Colombian relations into a volatile crisis, with the alarming possibility of military intervention looming large. On October 19, 2025, Trump unleashed a blistering Truth Social post, branding Petro an illegal drug leader who strongly encourages the massive production of drugs in Colombia. He announced immediate cuts to U.S. aid, historically over $400 million annually, and threatened punitive tariffs on Colombian exports. Most chillingly, Trump warned Petro to close up these killing fields, or the United States will close them up for him, and it won't be done nicely, a thinly veiled threat of military action. Recent U.S. naval strikes in the Caribbean, killing dozens, amplify this menace, signaling a readiness to escalate. Petro, Colombia's first leftist president and a former M19 guerrilla, countered with fierce defiance. Accusing the U.S. of murder in its anti-drug operations, which have claimed civilian lives, Petro suggested humanity might need to get rid of Trump, later clarifying this as a call for democratic change. By October 23, he announced plans to sue Trump for slander in U.S. courts and recalled Colombia's ambassador from Washington. This feud, rooted in clashing visions of the drug war, now risks spiraling into military confrontation, threatening a bilateral relationship critical to hemispheric stability. This essay dissects the Trump-Petro dispute through historical, rhetorical, and policy lenses, weaving in an analysis of the probability of Trump deploying U.S. troops to Colombia. We argue that while Trump's threats reflect a coercive, personalist foreign policy, the likelihood of military intervention remains low but non-zero, constrained by logistical, political, and diplomatic barriers. However, the mere specter of such action risks destabilizing the Americas, empowering adversaries like Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro, and fueling anti-American sentiment. Incorporating detailed policy impacts and regional ramifications, we advocate for urgent de-escalation and pragmatic cooperation to avert a crisis. Historical context, from Plan Colombia to the brink of conflict. The U.S.-Colombian relationship has long been defined by the war on drugs. Since the 1980s, Colombia's role as the source of over 60% of global cocaine has fueled violence claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. Plan Colombia, launched in 2000 under President Bill Clinton, channeled over $10 billion into military and economic aid to dismantle cartels and eradicate coca fields. By 2024, Colombia received $377.5 million in U.S. aid, making it Latin America's top recipient. While the program weakened groups like the Medellin cartel, it fragmented them into violent factions like the Clan del Golfo and alienated rural communities through ecologically damaging fumigation. Gustavo Petro's 2022 election as Colombia's first leftist president marked a seismic shift. Rejecting Plan. Colombia's militarized approach, Petro's total peace policy prioritizes crop substitution and negotiations with groups like the ELN. Though aligned with UN recommendations, his approach has drawn U.S. criticism as coca cultivation surged 10% in 2024, driven by global demand and climate factors. Trump's return in 2025 escalated tensions. His administration's 6 naval strikes in September 2025, targeting suspected drug vessels and killing dozens, have been denounced by Petro as sovereignty violations, with the September 16 death of fisherman Alejandro Carranza cited as evidence of U.S. overreach. Earlier disputes, like Petro's initial refusal of Venezuelan deportation flights, resolved under tariff threats, set the stage for this crisis. Trump's October 19 threat to close Colombia's killing fields evokes U.S. interventions like Panama in 1989. Petro's defiance, amplified by his UNGA critiques of U.S. policies in Gaza, channels Latin America's anti-imperialist tradition. On X, their clash fuels viral hashtags like #NoeLosReyesTrump, with Trump's posts amassing millions of views and Petro rallying regional leftists. Rhetorical analysis, threats, defiance, and the military shadow. Trump's rhetoric is a potent mix of populism and intimidation, Labeling Petro an illegal drug leader who is low-rated and very unpopular, he personalizes a systemic issue, framing Colombia's drug problem as Petro's personal failing. The killing fields metaphor conjures genocidal horror, while won't be done nicely implies military options, drone strikes, special forces raids, or even ground troops. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's October 22 announcement of a Pacific strike on an ELN-linked vessel underscores this belligerence, signaling U.S. willingness to act unilaterally. Petro's response is equally performative. His Univision remark about getting rid of Trump, clarified as a Democratic plea, sparked U.S. outrage, with Rep. Carlos Gimenez branding him a narco-terrorist. Petro's legal threats and ambassador recall cast Trump as a rude and ignorant imperialist, invoking Colombia's sovereignty. Both leaders play to domestic audiences, Trump to his base, incensed by fentanyl flows, 90% via Mexico but tied to Colombian supply, and Petro to a populace grappling with corruption scandals and economic woes. Petro's visa revocation in September, after urging U.S. troops to defy Trump, heightens the personal stakes. Assessing the probability of military intervention. Could Trump deploy troops to Colombia? Several factors shape this possibility. Drivers of military action. Domestic pressure. Fentanyl overdoses, linked to Colombian cocaine routes, killed 70,000 Americans in 2024. A symbolic incursion could bolster Trump's tough on crime image for midterms. Precedent. Trump's first-term drone strikes in Somalia and Syria, often without congressional oversight, suggest a limited operation, targeting ELN coca labs, could fit his playbook. Allies. Support. Senator Lindsey Graham's depiction of Petro as Maduro's buddy signals GOP backing for escalation, framing intervention as a warning to Venezuela. Rhetorical commitment. Trump's "won't be done nicely" sets a high bar, retreating risks appearing weak, especially after Petro's provocations. Constraints on intervention. Logistical challenges. Colombia's dense jungles and 2,200-mile border complicate ground operations. Unlike Panama's 1989 invasion, Colombia's terrain favors guerrillas, risking a quagmire. Domestic opposition. A 2025 Pew poll shows only 35% of Americans support overseas military action, reflecting post-Afghanistan fatigue. Regional backlash. Brazil's Lula da Silva and Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum condemn U.S. unilateralism. An invasion could unite CELAC against Washington. Congressional hurdles. While the War Powers Act allows 60-day deployments, sustained action requires Senate approval, which Democrats and some Republicans may block, citing costs of $1 billion monthly. Petro's leverage. Colombia's role in migration and $15 billion in U.S. trade is vital. Alienation could disrupt deportation flights and economic ties. Probability assessment. The likelihood of ground troops is low, 10–15%, due to logistical and diplomatic costs. However, limited operations like drone strikes or special forces raids are more plausible, 30–40%, echoing Reagan's 1980s Caribbean interdictions. Historical trends. Declining U.S. interventions in Latin America since 1990 favor restraint, but Trump's unpredictability keeps the risk alive. Policy implications. Economic pain and escalation risks. Trump's immediate actions, suspending $400 million in aid and threatening 25–50% tariffs, inflict severe damage. Petro's countermeasures, including legal suits and diplomatic withdrawals, deepen the rift. The following outlines the key impacts and ripple effects. Aid suspension, $400 million, intended to punish Petro's drug encouragement. This cut undermines Colombia's military and jeopardizes ELN talks, potentially strengthening Venezuela's Maduro by destabilizing border security. Tariffs, 25–50%, aimed at crippling Colombia's narco economy. These threaten $2 billion in exports, coffee, flowers, risking 100,000 jobs and raising U.S. consumer prices. Naval strikes expansion. Designed to disrupt trafficking, these erode Colombian sovereignty and increase civilian deaths, fueling anti-US protests across the Andes. Potential troops. If deployed to eradicate coca fields, troops could trigger economic collapse and insurgency surges, uniting CELAC against US hegemony. These measures, coupled with strikes like the October 22 Pacific hit on a Colombian port vessel, edge toward confrontation. Petro's legal gambit in US courts, citing First Amendment overreach, is unlikely to succeed but sustains his domestic narrative. Venezuela's Maduro could exploit the chaos, arming ELN proxies or escalating migrant flows. Broader ramifications, a hemisphere on edge. The specter of US troops in Colombia revives memories of imperial interventions, from Guatemala in 1954 to Grenada in 1983. On X, hashtag Noa Los Reyes Trump trends, signaling Latin American resentment. Petro's defiance emboldens the pink tide, but a US incursion could spark protests, cartel recruitment, and economic turmoil, with Colombia's GDP potentially shrinking to 3%, deepening poverty for 40% of its population. Maduro's support for Petro could destabilize the Andes further, complicating US migration and trade goals. Yet, hope persists. Back-channel talks, like Petro's October 21 meeting with US Chargé d'Affaires John T. McNamara, suggest diplomatic off-ramps. A joint task force on demand reduction, building on Biden-era frameworks, could align US and Colombian interests. Conclusion: from brinkmanship to cooperation. Trump's threats, including the shadow of military intervention, epitomize a reckless personalism that risks fracturing a vital alliance. While ground troops are unlikely, the possibility inflames tensions, empowering adversaries and alienating allies. Petro's provocations, though principled, court isolation. Both leaders must pivot to pragmatism, reinvesting in equitable anti-drug strategies, respecting sovereignty, and tackling US demand. Without this, the Americas face a new era of discord, with cartels as the ultimate victors. True security lies not in boots on the ground, but in healing the roots of the crisis.